Hey everyone, Sean here. Before we get to the show today, I have a bit of an exciting announcement that I want to share with you, our Operations Podcast audience. I wrote a book. The book is called The Revenue Operations Manual, and it hits shelves this month. So why a book? Why me? Why now? In January of 2023, LinkedIn released its list of the 25 fastest growing job titles in the United States. The number one job on that list was the head of revenue operations. This book unapologetically champions the operator. It's co-authored by my former boss, Laura Aiden, an amazing operator in her own right. And Laura and I believe that operators are at the center of what makes companies run. And it's time that we all embrace that truth. So this book is a guide for operations practitioners. We've interviewed over 50 world-class operators, many of whom showed up and came directly on this show. We've got examples of these amazing real-world role models from a bunch of different types of companies, industries, as well as cautionary confession corner tales for when things didn't go quite according to plan. The book also introduces and codifies this idea of the revenue operations mindset, which is a series of beliefs and statements that we believe that when taken together will change the way that you approach your job for the better. If you want to learn more about the book, you can always check out RevOpsManual.com. I'm also going to include a promo code in the show notes for RevOps20 to get 20% off the book when you order it through our publisher, Kogan Page. You can find that link in the show notes. All right, on with the show. Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. Have you ever had a conversation that just sticks with you for days? It challenges everything you previously thought to be true. You sit up at night rerunning parts of it in your head. I had one of those recently with Brett Queener. And luckily for all of us, you're about to hear it. Brett is a managing director at Bonfire Ventures, but he's not your typical VC. Brett, to me, is an operator at heart, getting his start at Siebel Systems in the late 90s, early 2000s before joining Salesforce.com for over a decade, running their first revenue operations team at the company and later becoming the GM of multiple products and business units. And later, Brett was also the president and COO of Smart Recruiters, which ended up becoming a unicorn. Brett was also one of the earliest guests on this show, and I've been fortunate enough to know and learn from him ever since then. Anything that Brett writes, I read. And anytime I'm lucky enough to chat with him live, I know the best thing I can do is just get out of the way. You'll see. All of this is why some writings on the implications that AI is going to have on the application software market caught my attention and kicked off the cycle that I mentioned at the top of the show that has caused me to basically question everything. In Brett's Substack, which is appropriately titled Tales from the Bonfire, he wrote two separate pieces, one on the 3 ages of application software and another on what he believes the third age, the AI age, means for all of us. In our conversation, he breaks down those 3 ages. We dive headfirst into an agentic future and why all of us need to question what we think it means to do our job well. To start, though, I asked him to take me back to his days at Siebel at the beginning of his career and what the first era of software, the on-premise software era, was like.
If you go back to before Siebel, my first job, it's like my last honest job, and I worked at a medical manufacturing company in Milpitas, California. Here's how long ago it was. There were no tech jobs in San Francisco. So I was a young yuppie living in the marina, commuting an hour and a half each day to lovely Milpitas, California. And I was that guy who brought them from DEC, VAX, mini computer, where it was a dumb terminal. There was no flexible UX, into client server. I remember trying to justify the expense for a 386 Pentium computer. It was like $4,000. So, like when I think about the on-premise software era, well, let's just talk about software in general, which is if you think about the software interface, like why does software have tabs, list views, form views, search, etc.? They're basically dumb UXs into the underlying tables in your database schema. And if you think about it, if you were going to go do something at Siebel, we did Salesforce automation. You would have accounts, contacts, opportunities, quotes, sales orders, or whatever it might be. And, there were records and rows, et cetera, et cetera. And the value proposition for why people bought this was so that management could track what was going on, so that in theory, they could do analytics around a process that they cared about to understand what were the issues and where could they go pinpoint what they could work. Whether that was, I'm not creating enough pipeline, or of my pipeline, my close rate is poor. And the close rate is poor because it's top to middle of funnel, or middle funnel to bottom of funnel, or it feels like this competitor is showing up, et cetera. But the interesting thing about the data only got in there if your ICs and the key salespeople enter this data in the system. But to use these systems, if you think about it as a human, if you wanted to go do something, or what I call like a CRUD action, right? Create a record, read a record, update a record, delete a record, or God forbid, look at a full set of records and maybe create a dashboard if you weren't stupid, so you knew which dashboard to go build. And hopefully the answer you're looking for wasn't across two dashboards, because then you needed like Jimmy Neutron to figure out the trends across two or three to kind of decide, aha, we have an issue here. But as a user, you just wanted to do something. Hey, I want to contact Jim at Marriott, or I want to know if we have similar, which deals we were competing against this person, et cetera. You had to think about what you wanted to do and then translate that. Okay, how does this application work that I would go do that? And what I call is you have to hunt and peck. That translation of I'm just trying to do this. I'm either trying to do something, I'm trying to answer a question. I have to hunt and peck across the application, understand how your application works to do that. Now, in the on-premise, the challenge with the on-premise world was, well, one, we shipped CDs. So you had a CD. You had to install it on a local device. If you wanted to change that software to meet your specific business process, you had to hire a Anderson Consulting or somebody like that, and you'd have to pay them like 10x what you were paying for the software. You would pay for it all up front and hopefully see the value. The other problem with this model was, let's just say Siebel came out with Siebel 3.2 and you were on Siebel 3.1. Well, you'd had to install the new CDs, and then you'd have to hire the consultants to make sure you kept the customizations you had before, and then any new customizations to take advantage of the new feature. So the deployment model was horrible. The user interface was the user interface of, oh, by the way, a lot of applications today. That was sort of that era. It was an expensive market in that, like, this is where you saw like people that are trying to do all-in-one suites versus sort of standalone suites. But the economics of this business, because if you didn't make your number because you didn't have much perpetual revenue, you were kind of screwed. And so there's sort of these very violent market dynamics in that era where, similar to the database market, where the number one player in a market would have north of 50% market share. And like 2, 3, and 4 would split the other 20, and then it didn't matter. And so you had these people that emerged as winner within a category: Siebel for CRM, PeopleSoft for HR, Business Objects for analytics, Hyperion for FP&A, right? So there was also this weird thing where, like, what you would do is you do these partnership with the SIs. My first job at Siebel was managing the Anderson Consulting relationship, because they could make $10 for every dollar of software. In theory, they were supposed to be neutral, but what I would do is get them to commit a large number of certified people, and they had to get those people off the bench. And so even though they were supposed to be neutral, software companies, because these products were hard to use, buyers would look to the SIs to make choices. Because the end product, wasn't what you bought. The end product was what the product you bought, what was deployed, and what the consulting firm could do with it. So that's how I think about sort of the on-premise era. But from a user interface perspective, look, you're hunting and pecking across tabs, fields, etc., and it's not helpful to you as an individual user. Like if you're a salesperson, Siebel didn't help you sell.
Right.
It may have unearthed things to managers of where you were deficient, and then maybe they would determine by looking at it what it was, and then hopefully they would translate that into how to make you a more effective seller. But the software itself, Salesforce automation, didn't make a seller more effective. You know, the thing we always joked about, even at Salesforce or Siebel, which is if the way you go about selling is dumb and you automate it, well, you're automating idiocy. So best of luck.
You're hopefully getting a sense for Brett and his perspective and why I like talking to him so much. The punchline at the end there bears repeating. Siebel and other software companies from the on-premise era that he's describing didn't help you sell. They didn't make sellers more effective. You could take CRUD actions, as he calls them, create, read, update, delete, but that doesn't mean you became more skilled as a result of using that particular tool. Starting to sound familiar? So if that's the on-prem era, things must have gotten better when we moved to the cloud software era, right?
My thesis is it gets worse. Why? First and foremost, completely. The innovation there was the deployment model.
Yep.
Right? At the time, you didn't have to pay a lot of money, pay as you go. And then, of course, SaaS companies were like, let's get you into annual subscriptions, right? And the big innovation that Salesforce rolled out was really metadata customization, such that you could make your customizations, and often you could do it in a declarative way. And we took customizations, which used to be a job and set up to either consultants or people that stuck in IT, sort of stuck between IT and sales, and we made it declarative, right? And so like sales admins before Salesforce were not heroes, right? If you go to Dreamforce, you try to figure out like, why is there all this energy around this application? It seems kind of not that easy to use for an individual role. It's because you took a class of people that were sales admins who consider back office support. Good luck hiring a VP of RevOps that isn't a chapter chair of, Pavilion in Des Moines who's going to work for less than $200K, right? We made those people champions, right? And we did give business more control. So that was great. Where I say it got worse was it's still tabs, list views. You look at Salesforce, tabs, list views, form views, etc. We made customization really easy. So now an admin can go in there and just start mucking with the screens. Here's some fields. Here's some more fields. Wait a minute. What the hell's going on here? Oh, right. Second, it used to be really hard to integrate applications in the on-premise world, right? Like I got an on-premise software that's being customized, et cetera. And now there's another piece of on-premise software. Oh, but those softwares go from 3.1 to 3.2, and that one goes from 4.1 to 4.2. Then the API breaks. Like that's a mess. With REST APIs, we can integrate these applications really easy. So now the average sales rep's using like 9 applications. So wait a minute, before I was hunting, pecking across one application. Now to do my job, I'm logging into 9 different applications. And often when I do something, no longer do I have to be like, I want to do something. I have to think about how to navigate one app. Now I need to go from one app to another app to another app. And then people are like, oh, it's okay. It's a screen within that. Or we've all put it in Slack where it's just a bunch of busybodies chatting. And you just like, stop the fucking madness. Like what? Like I'm just trying to sell something. I'm just trying to like maximize my W-2. I got a mortgage to pay. And then it got even worse in that because the nature of SaaS and then the just flooding of venture capital is like, if you aren't a great company, well, you got some recurring revenue. You can live for a while. Mm-hmm. Right. And so in a given category, you're a buyer today. Like, what do I buy? What do I buy for, marketing automation? There's 1,000 to look at. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Now I've got to spend a ton of time trying to figure out which of these is better and go to blogs and listen to the Brett Queener, Sean Lane podcast. Like, way too much complexity. Now, to be fair, we did see sort of what I call product led. Now, I don't want to call them a hack, but it's a little bit of a hack. What you do in product led is you figure out a certain process that you do very well, and then you stitch together the screens and the workflow in sort of a declarative play that, the user can just follow. Right. Now, the reality is for many of these were products that sort of started out with individuals and grew where there wasn't something to sell. And so they had to do this from an acquisition perspective. But look, there are good examples of these. If you get it right, it's great, but they are more the exception. Right. I remember when product led, was that product led? And now everybody's like, we're sales led. The majority, like most people that say they're product led, basically just have a much longer free trial where people, instead of trialing to see how the product would work in a situation, actually start to use it and you monetize later. But I still think if we look at the majority of software applications today in cloud, there are list views, tab views, etc. And I don't think for the individual user, we become more productive. And in fact, and look, I used to be the first head of RevOps. And look, when you build these software companies, what do? We get champions. We make them feel good about themselves. They really understand how to use our product. We might even write a book that the founder wrote. And we follow this approach.
Yep.
And then we put the person on stage and they feel good and they feel validated. And they're the master of how to use Marketo, or they're the master of how to use Salesforce CPQ, or they're the master of how to use Clay, right? And then what happens is I feel like we lost our heads a bit where we've become masters at using these tools or stitching these tools together, like, as opposed to like better selling. Like, I'm all for marketing attribution and marketing automation and the rest of it. But it feels like we spend more time trying to figure out what an MQL is, what the attribution is, as opposed to like, does our marketing suck? Does our messaging work? Do we have any brand? Does anybody know about us? Like, every startup's like, okay, yeah. So I'm going to hire an outbound SDR because I don't have time to do marketing with my first 3 million. And they're just going to dial. And I'm like, they're going to dial and no one's ever heard about you. And you're going to take a 22-year-old lax bro who probably wasn't a major in English. You're going to put him in outreach. They're going to pound messages that who's going to write? The lax bro. Well, how's that working? Yeah. Like, or the one I love. In 1990, when was this? In 2001, at Salesforce, at Siebel, we really had to kind of focus on creating real pipeline, because up until then, we had done what I call the partner jam scam, where basically, hey, buy some of our shit, we'll buy some of yours. This is before like people realized that like round tripping is not a good thing. Yeah. We also sold some stuff, but the economy started to dip. Like, oh, we need to do real marketing, real demand gen. And I was like, wait a minute, we're creating all these leads and sales isn't following up. So it's the classic, what's an MQL, what's an SQL, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Remember, I'd worked in a factory and I was like, this is like a factory. I produce bread, but if I take the bread and I throw it out of the factory and somebody picks it up 4 days later, that's some rotten, crusty bread. So even in the on-premise world, I created this thing where like, here's a process, what's qualified, and then here's the criteria, and the reps have like 3 days to follow up. And if they don't follow up in this position, I reassign it. A little draconian, but it worked. Mm-hmm. But I'll go to accounts where like, okay, I got HubSpot, and then I got Drift, and then I got Chili Piper, and it's too much to ask the prospect who they are and what company they work at. So I've integrated this with this and Clearbit. And then, they don't really want to talk to an SDR. So we just let them schedule meetings directly on the rep's calendar. And I was like, so you're using 7 pieces of tools to run the most fucked up process ever. Because we all know if you hand a prospect on your website to your reps, 1, they're terrible at self-prioritizing their time. And 2, if you want them to tell you if that's qualified or not, it's a mess. And then like 3 months later, you're like, hey, why are enterprise reps prospecting? You're like, well, it turns out their calendar is full all day with these SMB looky-loos aren't real qualified. And you just go like, we have to ask ourselves, and you're chuckling a little because you go into these accounts and you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Like,
and sometimes that 23-year-old is.
Yeah, we have a process. What's the process we're doing? Let's look at it from first principles perspective. And then the tool or how we do it comes secondary. But the tool, we've kind of become like the tools master us, as opposed to like we're trying to become better salespeople or better marketers or better SDRs or better customer success people. Or like, you know, at Salesforce, I created the first CSM in the SaaS industry. I'm not going to get into how I created it, but it's a funny story for another day. And, you know, love Nick. Like Salesforce did an amazing job creating champions and Gainsight, but like, you know, I'll go and talk to a CSM and I'll be like, how many hours a week do you talk to a customer? 2? What else? What else? The rest of it, I'm running these plays. I'm like, no. You were created because we're early and our product's kind of screwed up and our salespeople don't do a good job of qualifying. And you just got to get them love so that they love you and you send them swag and the rest of it to buy us time to get the other stuff fixed. That's like job one. Like, you spending 3 hours a week with a customer, like, and they would look at you like, really? I thought this was all automated. So I'm going on a little bit of a rant. That's a little bit of what I think about the what I call the cloud era. Better deployment model, easier to customize. I don't think easier to use.
I could listen to Brett all day, go off on everything that has gone wrong in SaaS. And I'm not pretending to be above any of these errors. I've definitely spent long periods of my career focused on mastering how to put tools together rather than figuring out whether a particular function maybe just, as he puts it, sucks. I had a CRO tell me once, Sean, no one wins an award for going out of business with the best systems. And that has stuck with me ever since. All of this preamble that we've been talking about with these eras is leading us to this moment that we find ourselves in right now. Brett believes that the eras where software did not actually improve the productivity of end users are over. And what's possible is shifting before our eyes.
So I've been doing a ton of research on, because like people will come to me about, hey, I need to do this for SaaS. I need to do this for SaaS. I need to do it for SaaS. And like, I'm old. I've been at SaaS longer than anybody. You ask me a product question. You ask me a go-to-market question. I'm not always right, but I'll give you the 80% correct answer in like a minute. Mm-hmm. Because anything you're considering doing, I have effed up 10 ways to Sunday. So I'd be like, don't do that. But I was starting to think about like, in this AI world, how much of that advice is obsolete? And so I started doing a bunch of research, talked to about 50 people. And what I'm trying to do, and it's hard because it's not my day job. My day job is investing in founders and trying to support them. But like, what is the new playbook for running a SaaS company in this, whatever you want to call it, agentic world, AI era, and the rest of it? And when it hit me, I got to admit, I walked out of a meeting and I was kind of shaking. And in my head, I was like, oh, holy shit. I don't know what this means. I got to write this down. Like, I think it changes everything. And when it comes back to this UX interface, which is, what if software was the equivalent of you hiring a super smart, expensive assistant that just worked for you? So let's pick like enablement as a category. Is the right thing enablement that somehow there's answers and it's a doc and we put it in HighSpot in some scar schema repository and the rep leaves the application and then searches because the answer is in a doc that hopefully has been updated later. And maybe somebody knew to be updated because somebody marked it up or was attached to an opportunity. And then some poor set of librarians were keeping this stuff up to date. That's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is if you have 100 reps in a company, what if I said to you, let's say there are 100 great sales enablement, there's the top 100 sales enablement people in the market. They're not cheap. Maybe cost you 150, 200 grand. What if each of your reps could hire that person and all they did was work for them? What would they do for them? What questions would they ask? What would they tell them? What would they guide them on? People are like, that's crazy. That is nuts. I mean, that would be like $15 million. We can't afford that. We got to, our VC says that our magic number is too high and the amount of money we spend to enable reps is too high. And we're still fat on the hog and we're in the ZERP era. We're too virtual and we're not hard enough. I said, let's just say you're a software company that cures cancer and they're going to work for you pro bono for a year. Forget that. And then what would they do? What would they say? Would a rep ask them a question and they go, oh, I went into the repository and I found a doc that was updated 3? No, they'd probably be like, hey, Mr. Thing, you're running against this customer. You're competing against this thing. It seems like you haven't really done a good job of discovery because we don't really know what the real pain is. So if we're going to compete, like I could say, hey, give me a data sheet to compete against X. I'm like, I'm not going to give you a data sheet, a comparative set of features. Like, let's go back, like on the discovery, do we understand their core pain is? And do we think that core pain is something that we are uniquely good at? Because if so, we can set the right competitive framework. And then I want to give you the information against that framework. That's what a really good person would do. We'd be like, hey, I'm up against, like what content is really good to use in this situation? Well, you're selling into a financial services firm in this subsector, and this is your competitor, and this is your persona. And look, in the last 4 deals that we were in that same scenario, here's what the rep did that worked. Here's what didn't work. And here's what docs worked. Would you like that? And what's interesting is that answer I gave you, I just made it up. It doesn't exist. It's not written anywhere. That's a real-time answer that somebody gives because they're super smart. Now, the customer would say to me, but you know what, Brett? If I hire this sales enablement person, it's going to take them like 6 months to be really good at my company because they're going to understand my process and my competitors and what matters. And I'd be like, what if we could do it in a day? What if in a day I could give you somebody who's really good at sales enablement and really knows your data, your processes, your docs, etc. Would that be interesting? And instead of it being $200,000 a year, I don't know, would you pay $50 a month? Now, at no point in there did I say the word software. At no point in the world did I say AI. But the reason I jumped to this is I think the new paradigm for software is it should be as helpful to an individual trying to do a job, at least in the assistant model. We can get to digital workers later. As you hiring somebody really super smart who knows everything that's going on in your company. That is the user interface. And that is exciting as hell. Because if you're running a company today, think about, if you're running a software company today, think about how much friction you have in your awareness, demand gen, selling, onboarding, supporting, R&D, building screens, building layouts, doing usability testing, buying Pendo because no one knows how to use it. If your software actually worked as well as an assistant, if they could afford to hire, so much of that goes away. And so for me, I was like, oh my God, maybe I'm too old to start a company, but like, I'm like, ooh, wait. So like for me, that's the big epiphany, which is that users are going to gravitate to an agentic interface. They just are. 1. And 2, they're going to gravitate towards 1. Because the second a functional user, like a salesperson or SDR or a marketer, etc., has their buddy that they like, that helps them, that they kind of train, they're going to ask them, hey, buddy, can you go do this?
Brett believes that this new era, the AI agent era, will be defined by an agentic interface where users have a brilliant, perfectly trained assistant to help them no matter what their role is. And he believes that instead of having 10 different assistants with different specialties, you'll inevitably have 1. My wheels were turning. So where are we right now in this transition and where are we heading? Here's Brett.
Like I gave the example of AppFolio in the 3 ages of application software. Will Moxley was at Siebel. He worked for me in product at Salesforce. $600 million property management software company. If you look at the product, look, I love the company. They're doing great. It's a doozy. It's CRM and ERP for property managers. And like, if you just wanted to do something they need to do every time, like apparently a property manager, you have to check for inclement weather and figure out when something's going to happen. And then in the old world, you'd have to go into like the query builder, now to use the query builder and kind of put bully in to figure out which properties are in the path of this hurricane or tornado. Then hopefully there's a child object that has the list of contacts. Hopefully you can subquery to figure out who the primary points of contacts are. And depending on the quality of your mail merge or messaging system, you might have to import into a messaging. And if 2 or 3 of them, their primary language is in English, you'd have to carve out differently what the English or other thing and go send. Take you like a half hour. Or with their product today, you could be like, hey, I think there's a hurricane coming. It is in these zip codes. Can you pull up my list of properties? Here they are. If I trust it, do you want to see them? No. Can you draft an email in the native language and send it to those people? Done. And then the inverse is, hey, you want me to do this for you every time? Every time there's an inclement weather, would you like me to send these messages to these people? Or would you like me to prompt you that there's a message or you want me to tweak the message? Yes or no? Now, in the old world, what would you have to do? Oh, God, I've done this. The user wouldn't do this. Some admin would be like, seems like they're doing this a lot. Okay, we should prioritize, go build this complex workflow that goes and does this, et cetera. If you were the product team trying to figure it out, you'd have to really understand what are the 15 things and workflows you're trying to do. And then you try to do 6 months to stitch together the screens and the workflow, a little customizable, and then usability testing and da-da-da. You'd have to guess. You don't have to do that now. So then, what then are 300 people in AppFolio doing? Are they having to go build all of these screens and all of these layouts and all of this stuff? Some of it, yes, but no. And so if you look at AppFolio, they have a competitor that has 3 other categories they don't have that normally would take them 4 years to go build and go figure this stuff out. But like if we're talking about solving for 3 or 4 other workflows, maybe there's some proprietary engines in them. But look, you just add to your repository to your metadata. You train the agent on your schema. I don't know. Yeah, I can do more. I don't have to build as much. And so one, agentic interface is where we're going. Now, I'm not going to get into like, what's the right, okay, is it a chat bot? Is it this? It could be a bunch of things. Fine. Sure. But my point is the product should be able to do what a user wants to do. And it should be able to prompt to a user something they should pay attention about that they should go do. That is the new thing. 2, a user is going to ask the first one that's super helpful to do more. They're not going to want to use 3 agents. You know, you ever have friends that like send you some messages on Facebook Messenger, which I still don't understand is like the most world's horrible messenger. Every time you go to it, you have to reinstall it. I don't really understand what the hell's going on. And then some people send you stuff on WhatsApp or something on text. Like, just send me a text. I'm pretty good on text. It's pretty amazing if you think about text. If you're married or you have kids, you're like, hey, honey, when are you home for dinner? 3:00. Okay, hey, I want to go golf for an hour. Is that okay? I'll be back from here. Okay, good. Did I log into some interface, go through a bunch of set of tabs to go do that? Seemed to work out pretty well. But you know, when you get those 3 different ones, like, dude, just send me a text. I don't want to do this here, this here, this here. I just want to do what I need to do. So if you my bold bet there is if you flash forward then, agentic interfaces for the win, users are not going to want to use more than one agent. You're going to have massive consolidation in terms of who ends up owning the interface for these assistants for functional users. I think that's what's going to happen.
And I think if you're...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And so what I think that means is there are a number of people today. It's interesting, right? You'll meet with a company that solves something that Salesforce doesn't do or Workday doesn't do. And you'll ask them, hey, so like they don't want a second screen. It's interesting, right? We'll ask that. Like, when would they go into your application? Oh, we'll be in Slack, et cetera. It's interesting. They've already said, like, there's a second screen question. We're already basically saying, if we could make this invisible from a screen perspective, the user would prefer it, right? We've been saying this for like the last 5 to 10 years. Like, why would I force the user to go somewhere else? And so I think there are a number of applications that want to be customer facing that are, that get moved down to the platform layer. And I think they're subservient to what I call a boss assistant. Like, I think, salespeople have one boss assistant. There are a number of apps today that I think move down the platform stack. And as long as they do something super meaningful, then the boss, and then it'll integrate to the boss assistant and allow the boss assistant to do something they can't do today. But if that's the case, you really have to have some really interesting metadata, right? Like,
And
yeah.
Can you give an example of that? Because you make this point multiple times, right, about the importance of relevant metadata. And if you don't have that, like, good luck, right? You should go try to get acquired by somebody today and go home. Can you give folks an example of what you kind of mean by that, and
Sure.
maybe a way they might be able to connect it to a company they know or an example in their workflow that they know?
Let's look at the go-to-market tech stack. This is a bloodbath right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got outreach and sales loft doing SDR stuff, and there's some Lavender and there's some Apollo in there. And then you got reps kind of using that. And then I got Gong doing messaging and calling, and it's got its little AI agent trying to tell you kind of what to do. And then you got Clary calling itself a revenue execution platform. Amazing product marketing for a product that if you just use Salesforce correctly, you probably could have forecasted correctly. But God forbid, kudos to those guys. Like,
I know it's your favorite.
But it's just like, well done. Like, and they're going to be a revenue execution platform. And then you got Salesforce that's now, throwing its thing out. They released their agents this week, et cetera, et cetera. And then within that category, there are hundreds of like $2 to $10 million companies that are people who are using for this use case. Oh, I use this for, and then I've got sales enablement, HighSpot, and those guys trying to tell me what to do in a rep. And then I've got, I might use, some like sales room technology because I've convinced the customer to agree to be in my thing so we can agree on next steps and I can see what they're doing. Oh, and then I've got like this sales room demo thing where I've created it and I can share and collaborate. I've created like 7 or 8 different cold faces and they're all trying to have agents. The funny thing is it's the same friggin' rep, right? It's the same person trying to buy. They haven't changed. Why the hell would you have the rep like use 6 or 7 things and force the customer through 6 or 7 things? There's going to be one boss agent. And I'm sitting here with my popcorn wondering who it's going to be. Right? Salesforce is going to fight to not be commoditized down to a database layer on top of a database layer. And the others are going to fight to try to be the engagement layer on top of Salesforce. But nobody's going to use for engagement in labor bots. They're going to have one for the rep, one for the manager. And all of those small companies that raised venture, that word I call feature, not a companies, raising 100x ARR, you're not big enough. You're never going to be a boss agent. You never have enough spread. You don't solve enough problem that you're going to be that boss assistant. So either I didn't get to metadata yet. If you don't have enough metadata, you're not going to be a boss assistant. Meaning you don't solve enough of the problem set that whoever solves the broad enough of the problem set for a functional user, if they get the agentic interface right, I think wins. If you aren't that, then what you can be, if what you solve has enough metadata around, it's not easy for that boss assistant to just go add that. And it takes time, et cetera, that you could say, oh, you use this assistant. You want the assistant to answer this question. We integrate it in. And now you can use that assistant. You don't need to worry about interface. In and now can do this. Fine. Right? You are subservient. But if you don't have, but if the problem you're solving doesn't really have enough metadata, then either the boss assistant could build it or people can build it internally. Right? Like I told you about my bot. So I publish a lot of things, not because I like to see I don't mind writing. It's kind of fun to write. But I don't write because I want thousands of followers and somehow I got, cred. It's not like that's the path to super deal flow. It doesn't hurt. But I do it because when I talk to a founder and I say the same thing 3 times, I'm like, I should write this down and share it. So I'll publish these things. I'll go to our CMS on our website. I'll try to categorize it in fuel categories to go look at it. And then on top of it, we'll run workshops with experts in the field, maybe you on go-to-market, maybe somebody on how to do executive hiring right, maybe how to think how to set up your ESOP correctly. And I'll get this expert, I'll get on the call, and it's great stuff. And like one founder shows up, and it's friggin' embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the person I bring on, but it's really ridiculous because if these guys actually knew. So I was going to give up on it. I was like, forget this stuff. It's worthless. But I'm like, no. So in like 4 hours, no, in 1 hour, without writing code, I mean, I could have written some code. I don't know, I use Chatbase. It's $100 a month. I connected it to all my content. And I had to make sure, be very clear, like your job is to help founders and et cetera. All of our content, strip the recordings, et cetera, et cetera. And also I'll find content from other venture capitalists or people who I think is really useful. And I'd love founders to know it. It should be in the knowledge corpus. I'm like, wow, that's great. But then I would have to create a section called content we love. It's not content we publish. You'd have to go find it. You're never going to go find it. And then I trained the bot on it. In like 30 minutes, you could ask it a question. Now, where I had to spend 10 to 15 hours on it was training that bot. Like, hey, dumbass, when somebody asks a question and you actually have a link to the document, include the link of the document. Or, hey, when somebody wants to know who knows this and we have the contact information, this is all inside family, give the information, right? Like that's live. And then they integrate to Slack. And I said, founders, if you have questions, go ask Bonfire. And the reason I like it in Slack is everybody can see other questions that have been asked and you can search for answers. That's it. Like, that's it. Done. And then I go to all of my founders. Somebody like, oh, what about AI? I'm not ready for AI. I'm like, really? You sell in this vertical and you say a really hard problem for you is that you sell in this industry and you can hire a good rep, but it takes them 6 months to know about the industry. I'm like, that's not a scalable problem. Have you written any of this shit down? Well, no. Okay. What if you write the stuff down and like you just put it in the thing I bought and somebody just asks any question that gives it the answer? And I'm not even getting like what you can also do is have a personal model that understands that personal history and that personal individual. And I'm not even including an empathy model that understands how this like person talking. You could add that. And they roll it out and they're like, oh, holy shit. Because in that problem I just did, there's no metadata, right? There's no like data. Yeah. There's no like defined objects in a process where you'd have metadata, right? So that's where, how I think about it, if that kind of makes sense.
So metadata is data that describes other data. It's usually standardized and structured, and it can help with organizing or managing data that you have. Let's take Gong, for example. If you've ever used Gong or Gong's Salesforce integration, you're familiar with their call duration data or talk to listen ratio, call sentiment, keywords. These are all examples of metadata that are unique to Gong's offering. Brett's counterexample of training an internal bot on all of his writings and writings that he finds helpful. Yeah, this bot is really helpful and timely, but it's not defensible, really. I did the same thing with our show. We've done over 130 episodes, and as much as I like to think people would want to listen to every single one, a world where someone can converse with the content from this show instead of listening to every episode is likely more useful to most people. So I trained a bot on every transcript in the show's history. Brett's broader point, though, is that no matter the example, once you've accessed expertise or knowledge or product information in this way, you're never going to go back. Ever. So what do we as operators do with this new knowledge of such a seismic shift? Because I can guarantee you that if you're listening to this right now, you do have people who are manually updating stale pieces of content in HighSpot or your library. And you do have folks that are taking 7 clicks to send an email in Outreach or SalesLoft. And worse, you've got reps that are just fumbling in the dark, looking for answers that they don't know in order to make them better sellers. So for us as operators, where do we place our bets? How do we plan ahead for the future that Brett tells us is coming?
We don't want to repeat the same problem in replacing 17 pieces of software with 18 bots that don't talk together. Like, it takes us 3 months to figure out why like reps aren't prospecting. Like, oh, turns out we were stupid, I think the first thing I would say is we kind of have to forget everything we've learned a little bit about the process that we're experts on. A little bit. It's like you got to go outside and go, blah, 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 and just do a first principles perspective. So before picking the bot, because I don't think the one thing on these bots, et cetera, there'll be interesting thing around if you move from one bot to the other, what's exportable and what's not. Like the most interesting that's exportable is any training that you do, et cetera. Is on RevOps and sales, I would really just go look. And then my next piece is starting with sales about how do you think about rethinking leveraging AI within your sales organization, right? The first thing that used to require a lot of really interesting intelligence was which accounts should I go after? Which people? What's the hierarchy? What account should people pick, et cetera? Whether it's Clay or the other stuff, like you don't need to be some super mad genius to figure that out. Like I get on calls, you're like, well, the SDR and the rep picked the wrong accounts to go after. I'm like, what?
Them filtering in LinkedIn Sales Nav did not lead us to success.
In 2003, I uploaded the entire DB and database into Salesforce. And I remember having to get security to do that. And I was like, I don't know. It's CRM. Here are the industries. How many employees do they have? How many people are in customer-facing roles? Here's how many. Are they early adopters or not within these industries? And I came up with an aptitude to spend, and I created a set of territories so each rep had an equal opportunity to succeed. Like people have forgotten territories. They're like, round robin, blah, blah, blah. Reps pick. I'm like, I want reps to sell. So first area I would very quickly look at, there are a set of common tools to go out there and look at and basically understand what accounts do we want to go after? Who are the contacts? How do we score them so that we have the right set of accounts per rep that we're going after and how we choose to engage them, if we're going to go in an outbound with a rep, et cetera, et cetera. Like that shouldn't require a lot of intelligence. I think the second thing to really go look at is what is the right inbound experience. You know, talking to Craig at Qualify and some of the others, this whole like MQL thing was this agreement between like Marketo users and Salesforce users that we shouldn't have 20-year-old lax bros waste their valuable time working from home with their mouse jigglers. I'm kidding. Many of them still work in an office. Like waste their time calling bad leads. Really? Okay. And so this notion of there's a thing and there's a signal and then therefore somebody follows up and it's a human that follows up and then they're doing some basic criteria question asking, but they can't really sell. And then it goes to a rep and God forbid if your product is demoable, some SE has to show up. Like it's like 7 people. It's like an IBM sales meeting, like 9 people. And then you have to hire an outside coordinator who doesn't work at IBM to make sure the meeting goes well. So I would really dig into that because there is something very interesting, which is that if somebody comes to your website and if you can have an AI assistant or agent engage with them and it knows enough about your process and your product and the questions, et cetera, and it comes across as actually helpful. The hard thing to overcome for consumers on that is we're so used to the first generation of bots or chat for the last 10 years of basically call deflection, and it's stupid, and it's just some like, did it meet the call tree? And if
decision
not,
tree, yeah.
Right. And so you just like, I want to talk to somebody. But the reality is, if that interaction could be better than talking to an SDR, because it should be able to be, really looking at that, and then understanding it's not just this is a lead or this is not a lead. Because based on that conversation, you'd be like, hey, looks like da-da-da-da-da. Like you're looking here, sounds maybe a little early for selling. Can I sign you up for this newsletter and the rest of it and keep you in the loop? And can I schedule a follow-up call in 60 days? Like you can actually carve more than just anode diode. In the past, like, is this a lead? Accepted. Oh, it's not. We rejected it. Like who's nurturing it? Oh, I don't know. Like, okay, well, that was stupid. I'd really look at the inbound side. On the outbound SDR side, so much of an outbound SDR's job is busy work. And I think there's a lot of automation that now occurs such that they should be able to sort of like move up a level in terms of like their engagement and their ability to have conversations, almost like junior AEs. Like if I look at the dialers and the rest of it, and like a lot of that's automated, who to contact and the rest of it, et cetera. And there I'd focus more on the quality of the messaging and the outreach and what it actually says. and how we tweak it, as opposed to like what activities you're doing. Sales engineering, go look at that. Really go look at what point do we allow people to really get and understand what our product is, and how do we go about highlighting to them, if we've done the right discovery, where our product shines in that case. And how do you do that today, and what does it take? Because one, oh, by the way, SEs don't need to do RFPs anymore. That's automated. They don't need to do security reviews. There's plenty of tools that automate that stuff. Mm-hmm. They don't even have to configure custom demo or POC environments. They could use Testbox that creates synthetic data and creates that thing. Wow. So now what's a sales engineer? If I don't make them do that grunt work, right? They're pretty good solution experts. So how do we think of what our solution engineer does? Can they do more, et cetera? Like really, I'd have them kind of go look at that. And then the final part is, what can we expect of a rep? I think we can expect, so what that tells you to some extent. And then the other thing is, for managers, what's a manager of a rep? How's a manager managing rep performance? Sales manager in this world of multiple screens, et cetera, in a software company is friggin' horrible. What do I got to do? I got to hire people. I got to fire people. I got to use Clary calls, this Gong, et cetera, and figure out where my deals are. I better make my deals. I better make my number. I'm supposed to scale and make my team better and call enablement, figure out where they struggle. And I'm not supposed to be super rep, but damn it, if I don't bring those deals home, like I'm going to look like a shithead. Oh, and then, oh, by the way, I got to make sure I don't enter the next quarter bone dry. So I better make sure I provide same opportunity of working early a funnel to make sure that when I get to next quarter, I actually have the mid-stage funnel to go close. Right? Possible. That job is possible. Look, there are plenty of AI platforms out there. You tell it goals and anomalies. It will tell you, hey, across your teams, across these goals, here's where you struggle. It will actually give it to your rep. Hey, here's where you struggle. Oh, when we meet on a one-on-one, let's talk about this. Oh, and if you struggle here, here's a link to some sales enablement or content or training. Right? And then we should rethink through sales enablement. Sales enablement by default is sort of one size fits all. We have a small team of sales enablement. They aren't content experts. We help product marketing write stuff. And we do a lot of it for boot camp when nobody has started working and there's no context and we don't know where this human actually is going to struggle. But like, what should sales enablement be? If I'm a sales enablement person, I'd want to know, like, hey, in our org, what's our biggest struggle? Is it creating pipeline? Is it moving from top to middle? We're really bad at doing discovery and creating some level of economic urgency that somebody wants to fund a project. Is the issue that we're really bad at beating competition and bottom of funnel? And is that true across our org? And do some orgs struggle worse? Is somebody terrible in enterprise deals, like not doing multi-threading? Like, what would a best rep look like this? And as sales enablement, how are you getting that data? These tools exist. You can get the data.
How are you getting it fast and knowing it's right every single time? Right, because otherwise, like, people like me are your bottleneck.
Yeah, like Pete and Atrium and team can go do that for the managers. They can do that tomorrow, right? Like tomorrow, like. But you have to rethink through how you should do your job right. You can't be like, what tools? You should be like, if I was really doing sales enablement perfectly, what would that be? What you're trying to say is, I have a perfect rep. Okay, what does the perfect rep do in each of these situations? Okay. Then how do I understand where those biggest deviations are in aggregate for one size fits all, one-to-many content? And then where is it most common such that I could do individual trainings and I could point an individual to get better? So then, God forbid, as a manager, I know somebody's struggling here. I could point out to them, you need to get better here. I can point to the content, get better. And if they don't, then maybe I can do a PIP. But today, somebody's struggling. I got to put you on performance. You're not good at this. You can't diagnose why. If you could diagnose why, you can't expect a manager to be the expert on each of those. And you don't actually make the rep better. And the reality is, a PIP is not a one-time thing. A PIP is, as long as a rep works there, you're always improving performance. But so you have to kind of rethink this. But the cool thing about this is we can expect a lot more from reps. Like, what excuses do reps have? And then the interesting question is, the other key thing to think through in these roles as you think about these tools is, well, what am I hiring?
Yeah, because we're going to challenge all the ratios. You're going to have unlimited leverage, right? To put this in front of people. And I think the best byproduct of everything you just said is it keeps you really, really close to all those end users. You have no choice, right? Because the thing that they need and run into and are tripped up by is the next thing to train the agent to do.
Why do you struggle? Why do you struggle?
Exactly.
Why do you struggle? And so you have to rethink so what I tell companies, it's interesting. We used to be like, employee 15 or 20, I'd be like, hire a RevOps person. They're like, nah, that's just because you're in RevOps. You're biased. I'm like, all right, good luck. And then I'm now telling founders, like, by like employee 10, I'm like, go hire somebody, I don't know, 25, 20. I don't want them having worked in CRM for too long because they'll be like, I do it the Chili Piper way. Or I'm 6 Sense Sensei. Okay, fuck off. And have them think from a first principles perspective, like, well, how should we do this? Mm-hmm. And if they can't write code, now some of the kids write some Python because they did R in school or business school. Have them go look at these declarative tools, and they spend all their time looking at it and are constantly thinking through how to automate that. And I almost call it like the chief of staff. I'm calling it the founder associate. It's a really smart kid.
Yeah.
Works for the founder because the founder's like, yeah. And when it happens, right, I talk to founders that are like, oh my God, third-time founder, like, you can't imagine what I could just do in Claude myself. Not even a tool, just him building some little projects in Claude, where in the past he would have hired 10 people across these functions in sales, and he still wouldn't have known why things weren't working.
Yeah.
And he's like, you know what? I can do this. And I can get these answers. And I can now, which I didn't do in my first 2 companies, when I hire somebody, I kind of know what I'm hiring for. And I have the beginning of a recipe. And he says, it's life-changing. And the capital that I've raised will last me longer. So I'm still writing on the, like, for me to be the expert on go do this, and it's these tools, I'm not going to be hawking tools. But I think it's just an opportunity for us all to go, like, I'll give you an example. I go to a founder, he's like, hey, look at my agentic assistant in my product that helps the user. I'm like, all right, what if something's not working on the product and they want to like log a bug? Oh, they go over to this tab over here and there's an intercom agent. What are you talking about? You have an agent who's answering their question. Why? It's just a different question. Why wouldn't it be the same agent? They're like, oh, I'm like, and the reaction is like, oh my God, I'm a dumbass. No, you're not, because you were doing it the way we used to think about it. But like, why would we do that? You can do that. That's not hard.
And I think like founder associates, first 10 employees you would have normally had anyways, those really smart ops people, like all of those people are going to get to do now is just inject their creativity into how to solve these problems, right? Like
when I was RevOps at Salesforce, the first RevOps, I had to create the category to like justify why I was getting sued by Tom Siebel, right? It was just 2 short, angry people, But anyways, what did I know about RevOps? I ran a factory before. I was kind of smart. It's not that complicated. We're trying to like talk to people, get them interested about us, move them down the funnel. Seems like a process. Okay, what would we measure? Okay, in the process, what we define in terms of what the person would need to confirm to move to this process. And then what would we try to do to move them to that? Ugh. And today, every time you look at a customer and they have this pipeline and the rest of it, I'm like, hey, what's your sales process? Like, what do you, when something is stage 4, like, what does the buyer have had to confirm in your stage? It says giving proposal, like you're doing this. What did they have to confirm before it moved there? And they look at you like you're an alien. I was like, yeah, like, right? Like it's not really a selling process. There's a buying process that you need to sell effectively through. And they go, oh. And so like, is the reason why Blackstone used to only hire STEM kids, but did you see they're all hiring liberal arts kids? I think the big thing about this is it can seem kind of scary, and it is a little bit, but it's really actually exciting, because as a founder or running a company, you can actually build a product that an end user is like, hot diggity dog. Can I slap your hand? If you give me that mascot, I'm not giving it to my dog. I'll turn to the mascot, sassy, and I'll give him a high five. Right? And then how you have to run your company. Like there's one line I had, which is like, what is customer onboarding if your product works in English the way somebody would want it to? What is onboarding? Like, what is that? Think about that. Like, how much better is that? Like, so there's a lot of things that are painful that you have to read these blogs and listen to these podcasts for the OGs that have done this because we've been through that pain. You're like, oh, that's going to be painful. Oh, that's going to be painful, right? Oh, you're selling to a large org and you haven't set up the right metadata in terms of org structures and, sub-departments and the rest of it. You don't have your admin screen exposed for customizables. Like all of this stuff goes away. It's kind of freeing.
Thank you so much to Brett for joining us on this week's episode of Operations. There's just so much to unpack there. If you couldn't tell, we didn't do the lightning round this week because we packed as much as we could into the time that we had with Brett. And if you want to continue to learn more about these topics, in particular what Brett has written on these, I would really encourage you to check out his Substack. You can find that at queener.substack.com. If you learned something today, make sure you're subscribed to our show so you get a new episode in your feed every other Friday. Also, if you learned something from Brett or from any of our guests, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.